like the look of that one.
There! On him!
Oh, you don't!
I've lost sight of him! The Città, in its wisdom, has elected to raise a nominal levy on all exports
Guardate che tagli di mazzo!
any of the arti maggiori. State attenti! Tutti ragioniamo!
Bene fresco! Appena pescato!
For charity in these hard times. Oh.
The Signoria has called a contest to build a new municipal hall to be sited near Santa Maria Novella. Interested members of the Arte dei Maestri di Pietra e Legname should submit applications to the loro palonieri.
What the devil is he doing? Rather dangerous, isn't it? What the devil is he doing?
I've distilled an elixir of lead and pomegranate. Ideal for the lift.
Am I dreaming this?
Well, aren't you a fun one?
I've traditional remedies and the wisdom of the Arabic.
What the? Attention!
No! My lovely grooming! I want all my
Vitello, maiale, tutta freschissimo!
grace to remove yourself from my sight! I cannot leave this.
bourgeoisie.
Say your prayers, criminale! Faster! Run faster! I found it! Any last words?
Shame on you, you pieces of shit!
I'm going to catch you! He's getting away! Break his neck.
Hello? Can you... Oh no, I'm so embarrassed. Is that coming through? You can... Right, I've just literally just been here speaking to myself, right? Mumbling away about why I can't hear any audio. I didn't have the mic on. that's a fantastic start, isn't it? That's brilliant. That is right. I'm still stumbling around here. I have not played this game, right? Assassin's Creed 2 in years. I think it came out when I was in school, so I mean I loved it. It's a bit of it's nostalgia city. This is. It's a bit surreal because I think I might even be doing my GCSEs. When did this come out? It came out about 2009. Yeah, I did my GCSEs in 2009. So this game came out as I was right. Let's see if we can get it right this time. Yippee. There we go. Okay, we're getting there. I was doing my GCSEs when this game came out, and it was quality. I mean, it still seems to hold up pretty well now, but the thinking here is, or the plan is, to be using Assassin's Creed 2 to revise, basically. I had thought about using a different game that was set in a different time period, but thank you very much, Petros. I had thought about using a different game, but it was just, I was bored. It's some game called Kingdom Come Deliverance, which I'm sure is very good when I get to know how it works. But at the moment, I don't, so I'm just, we're going to stick with this. So, the original plan was to revise Unit 1 of EdXL's Crime and Punishment GCSE, which runs, or the time period it covers is 1000, the year 1000, to 1500, and that qualifies as medieval England. But because I didn't really find the game that interesting at the time, we're going to extend that, and we're going to do a little bit of revision as well of Unit 2, of the same exam board, of the same course, but Unit 2 covers 1500 to 1700. Now, this game that you're seeing here is set in Italy, so it's not set in England, but it is set in 1576, and it kind of runs through. I think this particular game, AC2, ends in 1499. And then, like, the characters carry over to a future period, so I guess that could work for maybe something else in the future. But it's worth flagging up. This here is not medieval England, but it, technically speaking, even though it's the same time period that we're using for medieval England, it kind of isn't medieval Italy, because Italy at this time that you're seeing in the game is experiencing something called the Renaissance. There are all sorts of artists, all sorts of sculptors, all sorts of scientists coming up with bold new ideas. I mean, Leonardo da Vinci is active at this time. I mean, he turns up in the game, and I'm pretty sure if I get myself in order and I remember the controls and I have a go at one of the missions in a minute, I'm pretty sure he shows up pretty early. But for 1476, this game is technically speaking in the early modern period, even though for the purpose of the course we're studying it isn't. So what we'll do is we're going to have a little run through of how crime and punishment works in medieval England, super quick, and then we'll put most of our focus into Unit 2, which is crime and punishment in early modern England, and we'll see what we get up to, and we will see where we get up to after that. So for now, what I'll do, because I've only just started this back up, I'm going to make an effort to try and get the map sorted. So we'll see a few viewpoints, we'll climb up, we'll have a look around, and we'll go from there. So, when it comes to crime and punishment, generally speaking now, the whole course runs from 1000 to the present day, 1000 to the present day, and generally speaking are about 3 or 4 key questions that if you can crack, if you can get the answers to these questions, oh here it is, then you should find the whole course easier. If you can find answers for these questions for the respective periods that the course covers, you'll find the whole course a lot easier, okay? The first question is, right, I've got to synchronise this first. So this basically just goes around the whole map, doesn't it? And then it kind of shows off what's going on, and then they'll tell me some more stuff I can do, I guess. But we'll climb a few of these as we just introduce some of this. Right, hang on. There we go. Very, 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 very realistic there. Okay, brilliant. So the first question that we want to focus on when we're thinking about crime and punishment is who makes the law, or who is in charge? Oh, thugs. Ah. Is who... I'm not going to get involved with them right now because I've got stuff to do. I'll get distracted. Is who makes the law. So who makes the law in a particular place? Now, the law is determined by, ultimately, I know it sounds really obvious, whoever's in charge. Could be the king, could be the government. At different points and places it's been a dictator. But a crime is ultimately created or made or founded upon the law. If the law says you can't do something and there's a punishment in place for doing that thing, then that action becomes a crime. So if the law says you can't steal and you go and steal something, then naturally that is an example of a crime. Now, theft, murder, all those sorts of things are typically, they are pretty classical crimes, I guess, and they cover different time periods. They cover all of the time period that we look at. But there are some crimes that, there are certain laws that have changed certain practices that in different time and place have dictated things to be crimes or have created crimes that actually, in different times, have been absolutely fine with the same action. So a good example within the course is that homosexual behaviour and homosexual practice was illegal in Britain until the 1960s, and then the law changed, and now that activity is technically speaking not illegal. Now that's a pretty decent example, because just because something is the law doesn't always mean that it's enforced. So the first question, if we're going to ask the key questions of the course, is who makes the law? And then the next question, naturally, that flows from that is what is the law? And in different times and in different places, as we've considered, different laws are in place at different times, and that's absolutely fine. We've just got to get a handle on when that is, and we'll give some examples of the units that we're going to focus on today in a moment anyway. So, who makes the law? What is the law? And then the next question that if you can really get your head around and answer for each unit would be really useful is whose job is it to enforce the law? Like, who actually holds responsibility for making sure that people aren't doing what they shouldn't be doing? We'll touch in a moment, and actually this is probably going to be quite useful for these lads chasing us around. We can use this as an example in a moment. Okay, well that's enough of that, because I'll get dizzy otherwise. Get lost, lads. The next question is who enforces the law. That's changed. Nowadays, present day, we've got the police. They enforce the law in Britain. But they weren't always there, so whose job was it to make sure that things being put in place from either the King or from Parliament were actually being enforced or overseen in local communities? Did they always do it? Did they do it well? Did they not? If you can answer those questions for each unit, you'll be in a really good place for your exam. And then the fourth question is, what do you do with people who've broken the law? So how do you actually punish people who have broken the law at a particular point in time? Do you execute them? That was the case for a long time. Do you whip them? Do you beat them? That's happened in Britain before. Do you lock them up? How long do you lock them up for? Do you allow people to have what are now known as community sentences, where they have punishments, where they have to do things within the community? If you can answer that question for all four of the units that the GCSE, the EdXL course covers, you'll be in a really good place for answering most of the questions on your paper, actually, because a lot of your paper, a lot of the marks that will come up are based around the idea of transferring your information across periods, showing that you know how things change over time. Right, so with all that said, let's think a little bit about Anglo-Saxon England, because even though we're in medieval, well, Renaissance Italy here, the fact that we're being chased around and hounded around by this group of thugs is actually quite useful. So, in Anglo-Saxon England and in Norman England, basically in medieval England, let's just go with that, one of the law was dictated by the king. So there was a big change in terms of who the king was, obviously, with in 1066 when William the Conqueror conquers England, Norman conquest takes place, all sorts of new laws are introduced. A good example would be the Forest Law, saying that you can't go within certain areas that the king is designated to be belonging to him, and if you go in them, you're going to get executed. So that's a nice example from Anglo-Saxon and Norman England of who's in charge, the king, what sort of laws do they introduce, the Forest Laws. But the question that we're going to focus on, and there they are, look, up to no good. We want to think about who enforces the law. Now, in Anglo-Saxon and Norman England, the people themselves enforce the law. there was basically there wasn't a police force. Oh, here we go. Come on. Oh, I'm not going to engage, guys. I'm going to be very defensive here. I think if I do that, oh, there we go. Although I have turned the effects off, so this is just self-defense at this stage. But oh no, I didn't know I was so low on health. Ah. Okay, right. They basically, there wasn't a police force in Anglo-Saxon and Norman England, so people had to take the law into their own hands. But it wasn't just pure vigilante justice. It wasn't like there was someone who was designated in each town to be the person, although something like that would eventually, it would eventually develop. In Anglo-Saxon and Norman England, everyone was responsible for enforcing the law. Everyone. It was something called collective responsibility. As a community of people, you were all responsible for enforcing the law. And the idea was, if I help you enforce the law, if someone stole from you and I help you to get back whatever's been stolen, or I help you bring the criminal to justice, then in theory you're also going to help me do the same. You'll, if someone steals from me, you've got an interest in helping me, because at some point I might come and help you. Oh, they do climb up. Right, let's see if they follow down here. Oh, that, right, has happened about 4 times now. Right, that'll do. I'll take that. Happy days, okay. And it was called, so it's called collective responsibility, but there were systems in place. It wasn't as simple as, everyone just help themselves. There were systems that were introduced to try and ensure that people knew, within certain parameters, what they were expected to do. Oh, goodness, go away, mate. So, there was a system called the tithing system. This was established by the Anglo-Saxons, and the Normans essentially kept it because they thought it was pretty decent. And the tithing system basically meant that any man or any boy over the age of 12 was signed up or allocated to a group of 10 people, 10 other men, who were all responsible for making sure that people within that group followed the law. So if someone within your tithing was up to something they shouldn't be, and it was known within the community and someone had been found guilty, you were expected, and it was on you, to basically ensure that that person was caught and brought to justice. So that was one aspect. The other thing that people would often do, and it's linked to this now, is they'd raise the hue and cry. So let's just imagine right now that I stole something here from this lady on this bench. Let's just say, I don't know if you can steal stuff on this game. Let's have a look, actually. Oh, not now they're chasing me, I can't. But let's imagine I've just stolen something from that lady on the bench. She could call or raise something called the hue and cry. And the hue and cry was basically calling for help, right? It's a fancy name for saying they're called for help. And when you called for help, the expectation was that other people in the local area would come by and help you. If you're part of the tithing that the suspected criminals are part of, even better. But really, anyone is supposed to help. So let's say that lady on that bench had just raised the hue and cry and said, look, that chap's just stolen money from me or whatever. Then these people here chasing me and trying to fight me are trying to enforce the law. This was the system in place. There's no police force you call. There's no real system of going and getting someone in the immediate moment. It's all about everyone else pitching in and helping. Once the person's caught, then there would be a trial system, which we could talk about briefly, and that would lead then to punishment, okay? Now, if there was a dispute about whether I'd actually stolen or whatever, then that would be a little bit different, and it would kind of be a different... Right, this is rough enough. If there's a dispute about who was involved, if there was a dispute about who had committed a crime, then a trial by ordeal might be overseen by the community. And this would generally involve someone having to undergo something not very pleasant. It could be having to hold a hot metal iron. It could be being put under cold water for a set period of time. It could be putting your hand into hot water. And the idea was, when you did whatever the trial, whatever the ordeal involved, after a period of time, whatever happened to your body physically would determine whether you were guilty or not. So if you consider just briefly the trial by red hot iron, basically you'd hold a red hot iron, you'd have to walk a set period of time with it in your hand, and it would burn your hand. If in 3 days that hasn't healed, people would take that as a sign that God was showing that you were guilty. If that's still, if it had become infected, if it wasn't healing properly, people would look at that and think, oh, no, this person has obviously stolen or obviously done whatever they've been accused of. if your hand was healing well, that was taken as a sign at the time. Just wait here for a minute. That was taken as a sign at the time that actually everything was okay and that you hadn't done anything wrong. Now, weirdly, this wasn't a form of punishment. What this was at the time was law enforcement. It was all about trying to find out if you were guilty or not. So, if you held this hot wrought iron, or, you know, and your hand was all infected and gross. Let's just get healed up. There we go. You would then have to be punished alongside this. And in Anglo-Saxon England, most of the punishments that people would... I've had enough of it. Like, right, let's just go and climb at this viewpoint and get out of the way, because they're getting on my nerves now. Can't get anything done here. If you were found guilty, then the punishment would be, in Anglo-Saxon England and Norman England, usually something physical. You might get whipped, you might be put in the stocks or the pillory, you might, if you were a repeat offender, be executed. The main form of execution at this time was hanging. And that was basically how people enforced the law. That was how people punished those who'd broken the law. That revolves or kind of suggests who made the law, essentially just the king at this time. And local communities would have had their own things that they would have punished people for, but we don't really have to focus too much on the individual local aspects of the course. So that's essentially a very quick run through of Anglo-Saxon and Norman England. Now, we obviously should spend some time on the later Middle Ages, and I'm sure we will. I'll do another one of these, and we can do that. But what we'll do now is we'll focus a little bit on the period that this game is showing, at least that this time period was showing with regard to England. Okay, so we'll start thinking about what this period here at least leads into, the early modern period. So between 1500 and 1700. And it's appropriate really that we're in Italy for it, because a large part of the first question, if we were to consider these in 4 questions, you know, who makes the law, what is the law, how do you enforce the law, and how do you punish those who break the law, then being in Italy is actually quite appropriate here, because one of the main questions about who made the law in early modern England revolved around religion. I mean, this was the case in the medieval period too. The church was heavily influential then. But in early modern England, under the Tudors, there was a really big massive falling out between the church that was in place, the Catholic Church, and the king, Henry VIII, about whether he was going to be allowed to have a divorce. Henry VIII wanted to have his marriage to Catherine of Aragon annulled. I mean, it's worth saying that England did not look like this at this time. I mean, yeah, they were pretty far ahead, actually, Italy, weren't they? Have a sip of coffee? Right. I hope this one doesn't mess up, because that would be really annoying. I'll definitely die then. But if we think about early modern England, 1500s, Henry VIII becomes king in 1509. And actually, at first, he was a big fan of the Catholic Church. He was known as the defender of the faith. He'd written tracts. He'd written a defence of the Church. And but the Catholic Church, that is. And he didn't like this German monk, Martin Luther, the guy who had come up with... Oh, there's a codex page. I might have to get that later. I'll collect them later, because if I start doing it now and I don't do it properly, I'm going to get annoyed with myself, aren't I? So let's find the next viewpoint and climb up there. Eventually I might even remember how to get the map up first time. Here we go. Oh, we're in Florence. There we go. Didn't even know that. I guess that's where the game starts. So at first, Henry VIII was not a big fan of Martin Luther. He wrote a tract saying that he didn't like many of the ideas of the Protestant Church. But eventually, and you know, this is where we're going to touch on Unit 1 especially, well, Unit 1 and 2 really, of the Henry VIII Edexcel course. Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon, he didn't want to be married to her anymore. He felt in his mind that she wasn't providing him with... Well, that wasn't very good, was it? She hadn't provided him with the male heir. He felt that he wanted to marry someone else who he felt could do that, someone else that he just so happened to fancy the pants off, Anne Boleyn. And eventually, he would organise or orchestrate, or at least his chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, would orchestrate a move in which Parliament would remove the influence of the Pope, the head of the Catholic Church, from England, and Parliament would become more influential or more involved in making the law. Now, at this time, under Henry VIII, the making of the law through Parliament was mainly just what Henry wanted. It was just the stuff that he kind of wanted to get him on board or to involve or to realise. But it was pretty influential for the country because Parliament would start to come to the fore in early modern England in terms of making the law. And there would be periods where Parliament would really, increase influence, to the point that they would chop the king's head off, Charles I, and introduce a whole set of laws that would ban Christmas, that would ban community feasts and all sorts. So in terms of who makes the law, and in terms of what the law is, in early modern England, that's kind of touches on at least two aspects of that. But then there's another aspect as well, and that's about law enforcement. Now, I said earlier that there wasn't necessarily one person allocated, in a vigilante sense at least, to enforcing the law in Anglo-Saxon and Norman England. That kind of developed in early modern England. Not in the context of being a vigilante, but in early modern England a new system was introduced, or at least a system was developed or built upon, in which someone was elected as a town constable. You'd have this role for maybe a year, 6 months to a year. It would be voluntary, you wouldn't be paid, but people within the community would be expected to have more responsibility over enforcing the law than they had been before. Everyone was still involved and everyone was still expected to respond to the hue and cry, but apart from that, this person, oh goodness me, I was lucky with that. But this person, the town constable, would take most of the responsibility for ensuring that the law was enforced. Now, I'm going to see, well, I'll head over to the exclamation mark. So there were improvements and there were developments, slowly but surely. Even though the public and the community was still involved in enforcing the law, someone else would slowly come to the fore to take more responsibility in that regard. And there were changes in punishment too. One of the biggest changes, if you're thinking about early modern England, one of the big changes in punishment that can be really kind of located to this era on its own is being burnt at the stake. All the disagreements about which church should be followed, about what church the king wanted you to follow, and about the consequences for not following the king's or queen's laws on that, led to a unique form of punishment in British history at least, which was burning at the stake. Bloody Mary, Queen Mary I, burnt hundreds of people because they wouldn't recant or they wouldn't return to a Catholic faith. Now, I'm just conscious of time. I was only going to try and test this out for half an hour, so I've done about that now, and as far as I can tell, the audio's coming through okay, so I'm going to leave this here. That's a very quick run-through of early modern England and Anglo-Saxon and Norman England, and I'll run another one of these in the future, which will be a little bit more organised and probably have a little bit more to do on the screen than me just running around like a fool. But I'll leave it there. So if you've not already, it's worth, if you subscribe here and you hit the notification bell, if I get one of these running, you won't need advance warning. It'll just tell you if a stream is running, and I'll try and set it up so that they get recorded. So for revision going forward, I think this could be a really useful tool, because I mean, it's one thing running around and having a look to see what a period might look at. In this particular video, the period we're discussing doesn't really look so much like this, even though it's a similar sort of time setting, and some of it does overlap. But in future videos, I'm going to try and make sure that the videos themselves tie with exactly what we're talking about directly, and they'll be recorded. So for revision purposes, for like half an hour, 20-minute just pieces of information that would give you what in your exam would be referred to as accurate and relevant information, what we sometimes call in class own knowledge. This could be really useful. So if you think there's a way to make it better, if you think there's something that I'm missing that could improve it, please do let me know, and I'm going to chop this off now. Alright, so if you're there and you've been watching, thank you very much. Let me know what you think we can improve to make this a little bit. I think this could work. I think this could work going forward, and it definitely works for me, because it's more fun, isn't it, than reading a textbook. But there's definitely things that we can do. Let me know, and I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much. Right, one tour away from them. There we go. Right, that's it.